Good afternoon or good morning if you're dialing in from the States. My name's Lily Cheng and I'm the founder of the Rising Network. And a warm welcome to our weekly Time Out Tuesday. Staying connected with invited guest and friend, Dr. Francois Booker-Drew, who is the VP of Community Affairs and Strategic Alliances for the State Fair of Texas. She's also the founder and CEO of Solstice Consultancy, as well as author, speaker, co-founder of Heritage Giving Circle. A warm welcome, everybody. So I would now like to take this opportunity to hand over and welcome Dr. Francois Booker-Drew, who will give a brief introduction about herself and her passion for building meaningful connections, and then we will kick off to an open conversation. Francois, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Lily. I'm so excited to be here with you today and just share. And so I am very fortunate because every day I get the opportunity to work with some amazing people in community and build relationships and think of ways to bring resources to make a difference in communities. And so I do that through my work at the State Fair. And I love the opportunity to provide funding for organizations in our area and again, look at ways that we can convene and make impact. But I also have the pleasure of serving as co-founder of Heritage Giving Circle, which is the first African-American, one of the first in Texas that pools money that we all put in to be able to help our community as well. So you'll see that there's this common theme of helping and giving and building relationships to make a difference.
Wonderful, wonderful, Francois. So tell us a bit about how you got into this. I know you've done a lot of research in terms of kind of social capital. I think I believe you did your PhD in this, and you're continuously doing lots of research. What led you onto this path?
You know, I did not know the term social capital. I was thinking about how do you bring resources to communities with relationships. And I remember my advisor said, you should look into this term. And when I read about it, I lost my mind because for years I'd been doing this where I'd been using relationships to make impact, whether it was personally or professionally. And so for me, learning more about this term that's been around for, decades, and goes back to the early 1900s, I was intrigued with the idea of how social capital is used to build networks, relationships, associations. And so where I have challenges with the word is the capital piece, because relationships aren't always transactional. They can be. When we go to McDonald's and get a burger, we don't want to talk about life stories at that moment. We just want our burger and fries. So that's a transaction. But relationships can be more than that. They can be transformative. And so I wanted to look at how relationships, particularly with women that are diverse, can really create impact and make change in our communities.
So tell us a bit, you mentioned particularly around women. So I'm interested in that. Obviously, we're a network for women. We're very open and inclusive. Everyone's most welcome to join. But tell me a bit about what did you find in your research when it came to women?
So I brought together a group of women who were, starting in their early 20s to late 50s, and I wanted to see how they would build social capital using this process called immunity to change, which basically looks at what are the things that are barriers that keep us from creating change. This is a tool that's been used in organizational development, but it had not been used to look at if women could build relationships with each other. And what it did was allow these women to come in and talk about what they wanted to change in their lives. But in the process, they started sharing their narrative. And there's a term called narrative identity, where our identities are tied to the stories we tell about ourselves. And so what I noticed is, even though these women were sharing their stories, and some of them, we didn't understand, we had not gone through that. But what tied us together was the emotion. That when I heard someone talk about loss, or heard someone talk about resilience or hope, I could identify with that. And so the research really helped me think about what happens when women are in close proximity, how things can change, because at that point, you're no longer those people. You're now close to me, and I can become an advocate for you because I hear your story and understand what you're going through. And I find that women don't have a lot of safe spaces, which is why I love what you're doing, because women don't have a lot of safe spaces to come in and just show up and be present and to be able to talk and share their stories so that they can build connections. I really think that it's important for women to understand their own stories and their own journeys, the good, bad, and ugly. And in doing that, you're able to also empathize better with others. You may not know exactly where they're coming from, but again, those emotions are the things that tie us together. And in that, something called perception transformation happens, that what I thought about something now changes because I've heard your story and I'm going, well, you know, you went through this. Wow, I would have never expected that of you, because now I know your story. It makes sense why you may behave or experience things the way you do, because now I understand.
Absolutely. And I think that's key to learning. Being able to share your stories and experiences with others really gives you that shift in perspective.
Yes.
So I would like to open this up if anyone else has got a question or wants to join in the conversation. As this is a conversation, feel free to just unmute your microphone or raise your hand and ask Francois any questions that you may have. Does anyone have any? No one? Julia, Sarah, Lucy, Laura. I'm going to go through on Veronica.
Well, while we're waiting on questions, I want to go back to what you said earlier about the, you talked about the social distancing.
Yeah.
And I think in this season, we need to be very careful with language. I think physical distancing is what we're doing, but in this season of being sheltered in, we have to be very careful about staying disconnected. Being at home for a long period of time without sunlight, for some people who are not going outside, especially folks that are seniors and who feel isolated, we have to be very intentional about making sure that we're connecting, you know, to ourselves, to what our purpose is, to what our passion is, and using this time as a way to better connect to self. But we also have to use this time to better connect to others, and making sure that we are continuing relationships, leveraging our existing relationships, and checking on those folks who we know may not have the networks that we may have. And so I see this as a interesting season. I was watching Sunday, this gentleman talk about that there is I think he said in Chinese, there is not a word for crisis. He said the word is opportunity. And so in this moment of crisis, there is such opportunity for us to leverage our relationships and our networks. And I'm hoping that women use this time to begin to start looking at how they can build opportunity, so that when this is over, because we know change is inevitable, that when this is over, that we've used this time and stewarded well to build relationships, and that we didn't physically distance ourselves so much that now we're behind and moving forward.
Yes, yes. So what advice or tips have you got to give us all when it comes to, staying connected? So you mentioned two things, like use this as a time for yourself to reconnect with yourself. And then this is a great time again, to build that social capital, to build those connections with other people. So what two pieces of advice have you got? So one for self and then one for others.
So for self, revisit your goals. This is an awesome time to go back over that vision board that you may have created in the new year. You're now going into second quarter of the year. So how do you revisit goals and see where you are? The other thing I would add to that is I find that for a lot of us, we get busy because of mothers and our business and our jobs, and we're not doing the things that really lead us to happiness. So whether that's the book that you put down that you wanted to write, and now is the opportunity to pick that back up, whether it's a piece of art that you started working on that no one else may think is beautiful, but you do, and that's what's important. So how do you pick back up those things that you put away, but it makes your heart smile? Yeah. And so I think that's the tip for self. And then with others, how do you use this time to, like I did, reach out to you? How do you start finding folks that are doing amazing work that you admire and you reach out to and go, I'd love to get to know you, because what we do know is they're at home. Yeah. So there's a real opportunity for you to reach out to people, build your network. How do you go on your LinkedIn profile and begin to start looking at people that you may not have talked to in a while and send them emails and think about ways that you can create opportunities in the midst of this crisis situation. And so I think that for women, there is some really big opportunities that are available if we really are deliberate about seeking those out. And most often, they're right there around you. It doesn't require a lot. And I would say it's also important that you use this time, because a lot of us are on Zoom all the time. How do you use Zoom as a way to do happy hour with folks? How do you watch movies? My mother and I are watching a movie and talking about it, even though we're in two different states. And we're talking about this movie that came out and enjoying that and having dialogue around it. So you can do book clubs, you can do movies with each other, you can play games. There are all these amazing ways that even with this technology, we're able to connect to each other and stay engaged.
Oh, some brilliant tips there. And just touching on the goals and motivation, I'm not sure if any of you are aware, we do have a Facebook group, and Francois is one of our featured members of the month. And what you'll find in that Facebook group are our featured members, coaches, speakers, people like Francois on there who will post uplifting, motivational tips, advice. So every Monday, for example, we've got Motivational Monday, and so we were all sharing about our goals, very much like what you were saying, Francois. So if you need a little bit more support, it is an open group. Feel free to jump into our Facebook group there, and Francois will be on the group for the rest of April. So if you do want to connect after this event, do head over to the Facebook group. Francois will be online and she'll be there to answer any questions and to engage. So Julia, hi Julia. Good to see you on the call. I see you put something in the chat box. Do you want to ask Francois your question?
Yes, thank you. I've got two Julias on the line. I really enjoyed that, and because you know, sharing that emotion, sharing empathy, building connections, and I think that's what we get as a community. And this was my question. You're obviously an expert in this, and I was wondering, because I see that women tend to have peer networks, as women at a similar level of seniority, whereas I often find that men have many more sponsors and more senior advocates. And is that a difference that you've spotted in your research, and is it something we should be conscious of?
Yeah, it's very interesting that you bring that up, because what I'm noticing is it also depends upon the career. So I notice in nonprofit management, you tend to see, because there are a lot of women in that space, you tend to see these peer networks based on the level that they're in. So if they're in senior leadership, they tend to, run with folks that are in that same space. I notice with women who are in corporate settings that the sponsorship piece is so important and critical, because it's the legitimacy that it provides. I think what women confuse is, and there was a great article in Harvard Business Review about this, is that women confuse the difference between mentors and sponsors. And so a mentor is someone that really doesn't open the door for you. They talk to you, give you advice, and we should have mentors. I think women have to be strategic in identifying who are sponsors. So these are people who not only share their knowledge with you, these are the folks who actually open up doors and advocate for you. And I think a lot of us get stuck in the mentor piece, and we don't move into identifying who are those folks that can be sponsors that are in positions that we ultimately want to move into. How do we allow them to be in community with us and help us through that? So it's really important. You made me think about, there's some research on this idea of what's called high quality connections. And these are these relationships that can endure tension. And it's kind of like, you meet someone, and I always give this joke. You meet people, and there are certain folks that when you walk away, you feel like you need an adult beverage because they drain everything out of you. So how do you find these relationships with people that there are these connections, male or female? And so how do we begin to work in finding those high quality connections? And there's some great research that's come out about that as well. But how do we find these relationships? And those are the ones when you meet somebody, you click immediately. You don't understand it, but you walk away and you feel like, I've known you all my life. And those are the things that we need to move toward, instead of identifying folks sometimes who have positions but are toxic. And I think quite often we will gravitate toward the title and look at the function that a person plays, but not looking at, are they the kind of folks that can really help me and not deplete who I am. And I think quite often we have to be so careful of that as women, because we're trying to move into these spaces, but quite often you're identifying and meeting with people who may have the title, but they don't have your best interests at heart. So just being mindful of how do we become more intentional about those high quality connections and our mentors and in our sponsors.
Really,
So
really
I hope that
good
answered your
answer.
question.
That does. That really does. I was jotting down notes. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Francois, what if so you had suggested to connect with people that don't deplete you, rather than, you're absolutely right, quite often people look at job titles and think, oh, I must connect with that person because that person can connect me to so and so. But actually, you're right, we should connect with those that actually can support us and lift us in other ways, which will enable us to make those transitions and to move. But what if you are faced with someone that's blocking you, sponsor, manager, whatever capacity, and to set the context, it's in the work setting, what advice would you give?
You know, I have had a number of bosses who were amazing. I've had a number who were very toxic. I think you have to determine what's important for you. I will never say to someone, you need to quit your job, because you may have variables that I'm unaware of and I don't know. So I would never say that. What I would say to someone is, you know, are there opportunities to coach up? Can you coach your boss and help them, and without them even probably realizing that you're coaching up? Is there opportunity for that? Is there an opportunity to work with your team, and your team really begins to do a lot of the buffering in terms of dealing with the person that's in charge? So having those advocates on your team is going to be important. I think when it begins to impact your sanity, no job is worth your sanity and your peace of mind. And so when it becomes a point of your health is being compromised, and I see a lot of women who will stay in positions because we have to be mindful of, you don't want to ever operate from a scarcity mindset, that there is this belief that there is not enough. I tend not to operate from that. I believe that there is enough for all of us. And so if you're gifted and talented and you know that, you don't deserve to be mistreated. And so when it is, you know, an issue of your health, then that's the time, in my opinion, that you need to make a difference. If it's a boss because it's a personality issue, or you do things a little differently, is there a way that you can begin to, you know, address that, and it's a win-win for both of you, where that person gets their need met and so do you? So I think it really depends on the degree of the situation, you know, and how you deal with those toxic environments.
Brilliant. Thank you, Francois. So we have Veronica. Hey, Veronica. Do you want to ask your question?
Hi, so you've just been talking about like making these high quality relationships and finding the right sponsors. Do you think introverts have a harder time doing that? And is there a way to kind of get over that, perhaps?
You know, I think the challenge is what we identify as introverted. Introverted doesn't necessarily mean that you don't want to have relationships with people. I know folks that, my daughter is a prime example. She's not anything like me. And so when people meet her, they're kind of stunned because they expect her to walk in and hug everybody. And she's very quiet, but she'll talk. She observes everything. And so I've had to learn that introverted doesn't mean that I don't want to be around people. I'm just very careful about my environments and how I interact with folks. I don't know if it's a harder time in finding those relationships. I think it may require that you're not the person who's doing the crowd thing. So you may not do the big networking events, but you might be the person who is looking at how to identify the folks on LinkedIn and send an email. So I think it's your strategy may look a little different than an extrovert who decides to go to these big networking events and meet all these people in those spaces. You may have to really think about, who are the list of 10 people that I really admire in the field that I'm in, and how do I reach out to them individually and have coffee with them? And I always tell folks, when you're meeting with people, think about what are the 3 things that you want from them. Because what I'm noticing is people will come in and ask me to mentor them, and I'm always happy to do that, but they don't use their time very well. So how do you, when you email those people, you're very specific on what it is that you're seeking from them. What are the 3 things that you would like to be able to discuss with them? And from that point, you'll be able to determine if that's someone you want to have as a mentor. Is that someone who really is more than a mentor and who could be a sponsor? Or is this just a person who's an information giver, that every once in a while you just check in with them and they give you some information? So I don't think that introverts have a harder time. I just think the strategy may look different for them than it does for someone who's more extroverted. That's all. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, it did great. Thanks.
That's a really good tip. Think about 3 things that you want to kind of not get out of the relationship, but 3 things, kind of benefits that you can kind of gain by connecting with someone. It's taking that intentional action rather than just doing and doing. I think quite often we just do, right? We're just churning and doing and doing. I really like that. I really like that advice, François. So does anybody else have a question for François? No, so we'll just carry on talking then, François. So I know that you we've got 5 more minutes, so before we wrap up, I know that you've written a book on engagement, the rules of engagement. Tell us a little bit about that.
So I was working on my PhD, and I am one of those oddities who decided to write a book in the midst of writing a dissertation. And in retrospect, that's probably one of the craziest things to do. But I was researching these women, and I was so intrigued by the stories they were telling that I thought about what would it look like to write something that helps women think about their own stories so they can better connect to others. And so I wrote the book, Rules of Engagement, Making Connections Last, where there are 20 plus, rules that I thought women needed to have in order to connect better to others. A little story about it that's so amazing. There's a young woman in Dallas by the name of Alicia Morgan, who I keep saying I need to write her a check, because she advocates for this book, because she said it changed her life, because she was in engineering, was having a hard time getting jobs, had been laid off, and then she used the tools in the book to help her start thinking about strategically building her social capital and what it has done for her. And she's a vice president now of an organization here in Dallas. And I'm so proud that the book had that kind of impact. That was my goal, was to really get women to start thinking more about the relationships that they're building. Again, there are going to be transactional relationships, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing. But how do you begin to start really thinking intentionally about the networks you're building so that they are impactful for you and the people that you're around? And that's what she did. And that's what I hope the book does, is to help people really think about that.
Brilliant. We will be touching on the book a bit later in an online event with François, which I will spotlight towards the end of this call. Very quickly before we wrap up, Nicola Faulkner. Hey, Nicola. Do you want to ask your question? I know your video camera's not on, but do you want to unmute your mic and ask away? Oh, we can see you.
Hi. Hello, Lily and François, and thank you very much. It's a quick last-minute question. I just wondered about connections that I've had in the past that have been really good and really inspiring, but for just different reasons and silly things really I've lost touch with. So are there kind of good ways to regain connections, and are there ways that you shouldn't try and regain those connections?
I think this being sheltered in is such a great opportunity and excuse to get back in touch with people and say, I just wanted to check on you. You were on my mind. We haven't talked in a while. I'd love to catch up. People are doing that to me, and I'm going, that's so cool that you thought about me. And I was worried. And I know we haven't talked for life reasons. Things have happened, kids, all of that. I just wanted to reach out. So you've got a really great excuse now to just reach out to people and go, I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing. And it's a great way to reconnect, and it's being thoughtful. I haven't talked to you in a while, and I know that this is a very challenging time. Know that I still care about you, and I'm here. And so send a note, and ask, hey, do you have some time for us to get on Zoom or make a phone call? So you've got a great excuse now by being sheltered in to do this. And I don't think there's a wrong way. I think the wrong way would be, starting off with the negative. Yeah, I hadn't talked to you in a long time. No, start off with, I really miss you. And I really just wanted to reconnect and see how things are. So use this as, again, an opportunity to build those relationships. Once again, life happens. I've got some friends that the same thing has happened, but when the timing is right, I believe that it all comes back together again. So try that and let me know how that works.
Thank you very much. I will.
You're welcome.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're going to have to call it a day. It's almost 3:30 here in the UK. Your time, Francois, is it 9:30?
9:30 in the morning.
9:30 in the morning. So I'm going to have to wrap up. I want to take this opportunity to thank you so much for joining us, Francois, and thank you everyone else for joining. It was really good to see you all, really good participation, and I really hope that this is providing you with a safe space to keep safe and sane, as I like to say, during COVID-19. This space here is for you. So do dial in with us next week. Before we go, I just want to spotlight on some events that we've got coming up, just to make sure that you don't miss out. So for this week, on Wednesday, we have got perimenopause and menopause within the workplace with Kate Drummond, who is a coach. She's also a member of the Rising Network. So she's running a session on Wednesday, the 15th of April. It's a lunchtime session, 12 o'clock till 1. This Friday, great time for it to kind of kickstart any creative projects. Francois mentioned it. If you've always been wanting to write a book, I believe that all of us have a book in us. This is a good time to make a start. So we are running a session, an introduction on how to write and publish a book with Alison Jones, who's got 25 plus years in publishing. She supports lots and lots of people, entrepreneurs, coaches, business owners, on how to write a book and how to use a book as a tool to sell your expertise. Then next week's Time Out Tuesday, we're all going to have a laugh. We've got humorous observations of COVID-19 with Zara Janjur, who's a really good friend of the Rising Network. She's a part of the Comedian Writing Club for the BBC. She's a producer, she's an actress, among many other things. She'll be doing 30 minutes on her observations of COVID-19. And then we have got towards the end of April, the next Time Out Tuesday is laughter yoga to release stress and anxiety. So come prepared to laugh for 30 minutes in that session. End of the month on the 30th of April, we've got project management for non-project managers with Naily. That's on the 30th, and it's a lunchtime session. And then our final Time Out Tuesday is 5th of May, natural ways to boost the immune system. So we've got lots and lots of events coming up. We've got more and more. So do check out therisingnetwork.com for more information about what we've got coming up. But I would like to just spotlight this one with Francois on social capital and the rules of engagement. So we've touched on it today. Francois mentioned about her book. This is going to be an hour and 30-minute interactive workshop, so it'll give us a chance to delve a little bit deeper into that. So I don't know, Francois, if you want to quickly highlight, very high level, what we'll be covering.
We're going to continue that conversation around what is social capital. We're going to talk about narrative identity. We're going to spend some time learning a little bit about my story and journey, and thinking about how the story shows up. So we're going to learn a lot of things, and we're going to talk about, perceptions and how they impact our ability to do what's called bridging social capital. So we're going to learn about bridging and bonding social capital and a whole bunch of other stuff. It'll be fun.
Ooh, it's going to be a fun session. So do book up now, 28th of May. That's an hour and a half session there. And that's it from me. I'm going to wrap up. Thank you so much again, Francois, for joining us today. Thank you everyone for joining in the call. And I hope that you are all keeping safe and sane at home. Do check in with us again next week for Time Out Tuesday. And I wish you all a good afternoon. Thank you, everyone.